Hi, and welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take educational theory and turn it into educational practice. The topic for today's Todd Talk is going to be the idea of using projects to build maximum capacity in your classroom. And so, what this is going to kind of look like is I'm going to spend 10 minutes with the Todd Talk describing the steps that you should follow to create a project. And then from then on, it turns into a workshop where you, as the teacher, are taking what you have learned and creating your own projects using these steps. And so I'll provide a link to some resources, should you need them, that you can use when you're creating your projects. So the first thing I want to talk about is why use projects in the classroom. So there are several here that you see listed, but a couple that I'm going to focus on is the idea of that projects teach 21st century skills. 21st century skills are very valuable. A lot of times we focus on content in the classroom, when in reality, we should be focusing on skills. Can a kid, successfully summarize something, or can they take something and turn it into a creative idea, or so on and so forth. And so projects allow students to naturally use these 21st century skills such as collaboration, skills such as creative thinking and problem solving, skills such as public speaking can work their way into projects. And so these skills will make a student very valuable in the workforce later on, and make them more successful down the road, like in college. And the second thing I'm going to focus on is I like that projects allow a lot of room for learning. So what I mean is that it does not really put a ceiling on the learning. You create an open-ended problem, and then because of that open-ended problem, students can go as far as they're capable of. So if they're able to go really deep, they have a lot of background knowledge and they're able to go very deep into that, they have the ability to do that. If they are at a basic level and they just need to learn, the general idea of it, then they can go that far as well. So it allows students to go as far as they want. So it naturally differentiates, which I always liked. So there are 6 steps to the creation, to the unrolling and completion of a project. And so we're going to focus mostly on the top 3, which are to define the problem, developing the solution options, and planning the project. We'll talk about the other ones a little bit, but the purposes of this Todd Talk, we'll be discussing mostly on how to create the project. So first is to define the problem. So what does that mean? So essentially what that means is that what are students trying to solve? What are they trying to master? And so we live in a content standards educational world. And so I always thought it was important to link my projects to content standards in this way. Because a lot of people will be skeptical about projects because we're not teaching the content standards, or we're not able to get through the content standards, but that actually is not accurate. You can very much link to the content standards. And so you can link to one, or you can link to several content standards. The one thing you need to consider, though, is if you do link to more than one content standard, so you have like 3 or 4 content standards, let's say, you need to make sure that when you're assessing, that you are assessing each of those individually. You don't want to do it as a whole, because then you don't know where kids are deficient or where they're excelling. And so in the assessment phase, you will have to make sure that you are evaluating for each of those. And so you'll see whether students are mastering or not. So an example would be this one right here, which is a social studies standard from the 5th grade. So American Indians developed unique cultures with many different ways of life. American Indian tribes and nations can be classified into cultural groups based on geographic and cultural similarities. And so I would take this content standard and flip it into a question. And so in this case, it would be, how does geography affect the culture of Native American groups? And how does it reflect in the culture that they created? And so that's what the question became for this particular project. The second step is to develop solution options. And basically, this is a fancy term for what are students going to produce at the end of this to show that they learned what it is that I wanted them to learn. And so I always begin with the end in mind. So I start with at the end, and then we kind of work backwards. And the idea, this backwards building idea, is that I have an idea of what we're going towards, what we're striving for, and what needs to be done to get us there by doing the backwards building. And so the essential question that I ask myself when developing solution options is, what product would demonstrate the mastery that I want students to achieve. And sometimes this may be a very specific product. Sometimes it may be very general. And so I do try to give as much choice as possible to students, in that the more choice you give them, the more creative that they're going to be. So the backwards building process is basically identify what you want to accomplish, which we've done with our content standard. We've determined a product. So in this case, I determined that I want students to create an exhibition in a museum that displays this culture and talks about how the geography then influenced this culture. And what the display looks like is up to them. But I would give them models of what this might look like. And then I have to plan, how am I going to develop this? So what that means is, what skills are students going to have to learn, or what content are students going to have to learn in order to successfully navigate their way through this project? And so why I use the backwards building process? Because if you start at the beginning, what you get is what you see here, where you see people meandering and wandering, and it's just not very efficient. And so I like to be a little more efficient. And so by starting from the end, what happens is you have a straight line from the beginning to end, and it's very efficient, and you're getting the most for your what is you're teaching. So this is an example of a menu board that you could use to have students come up with products, or it's a menu board that you could refer to decide what products it is you want students to do. But they're broken down into 4 sections, and then there are several examples there, what that might look like. The third phase is to actual plan the project. And so again, keeping with this backwards design process, what you kind of do is you start with that end, and then you work backwards. So if I'm creating a Native American museum, what do I need to do immediately before they turn in, or they actually open their exhibit? What has to happen before that? And then what has to happen before that, and so on and so forth, till I get to the beginning of my project. And so you start from the end, you plot out each step of the project. These could be skills that need to be taught. It could be content that needs to be taught. You also want to kind of establish an idea of the time that it takes to accomplish these tasks. There may be some give and take to that. It may take some students longer for some things and shorter for others. But if they're pacing themselves, then this gives them an idea of how they should be pacing themselves. And always try to model for the students. So if you want them to do a museum exhibit, then you should look at examples of museum exhibits from around the world, and what they did and what they did well, and what they could have done better. And so these are things to consider when planning the project. So this is our third part of the backwards building. So if I were doing this, I have this museum piece, that's the final, that's the end product. But before they do that, they have to create a display for their artifact. So, but immediately before that, they have to create the actual artifact that they're going to have a display for. Before they can create an artifact, they have to link how environment connects to the culture, because that's kind of the essential question. Before that, they have to actually research that aspect of culture. So what are the details concerning that aspect of culture? Then they have to identify an aspect of culture they want to learn more about. And so before that, then they have to research the Native American group. So we broke them into geographic regions: the Eastern Woodlands, the Plains, the Northwest Coast, the Southwest. And so we'll look at those groups, and then to identify a Native American group they want to learn about. So I introduced that to them. These are the different areas. And then from then I let the students do a lot of the research. And try to find something that they're interested in doing. So the way this project looks is that there are 30 students in the classroom, and each of them is doing a different exhibit or a different aspect of culture. And if I have some that want to do the same aspect, I may put them together as a team. So I might have teams of 2, I might have teams of 5, I may have people by themselves. So basically the grouping organically happens because of the way that the student choice is happening. And so, again, you have to determine how much time is going to be given to each of these steps. And so what this looks like is here. So if I create a calendar, I started at the end where the museum opens for visitors, and then I work backwards. And that takes me, so I know I'm going to work 4 weeks on this project. And the different aspects are kids are going to be researching a group, researching an aspect of culture, creating an artifact, and then creating a display for that particular artifact. So executing the plan just means making the plan clear to students. So what is it that you want from students, and what should they expect? And so you also have to clearly communicate this with parents, especially with projects, because students or parents are not overly familiar with project-based learning necessarily in the classroom because it's not a traditional form of learning. And so some may question, like, what are you doing with these projects, or how can I help? And so you want to make sure that you make them aware of what it is that you're doing and what they can do to assist their child. So executing this plan, I use three different kind of products to help me with that. So I have a syllabus. And so a syllabus just is an explanation of what students are going to be doing. And so usually one page, and students can refer to that whenever they're stuck on something or whenever they're trying to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. I also either give kids a calendar, or we create a calendar together, or they create their own, so they can manage their time. Time management is a 21st century skill. It's really important for them to learn. And then lastly is a rubric. I usually give them a rubric, or we create one ourselves, or depending on how individualized their product is, they might be creating their own rubric. But this rubric then is kind of like a roadmap that shows them what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And so one resource that you can download from my website is this blank project contract. I use this when I create, by filling and answering these questions, I'm essentially creating my syllabus. And then once I've filled this all in, then I go back and create the syllabus. And the syllabus might look something like this. So there's Native American Museum. It tells students what they're supposed to be doing, and what it is that their product is going to be. And then you see underlined how the environment shaped this aspect of culture. So how that's the essential question I want students to be learning, and then how it's going to be evaluated on three different aspects. And so this makes it clear to students and parents what it is that they're going to be doing. So here's an example of a rubric that I gave to them. And so I broke down the three things that you just saw back here. I broke down into the three different parts of the rubric. And so if you want an excellent, it's got to look like this. If you want a good, it's going to look like this. And if it needs improvement, it looked like this. And so I give this to them before they start the project. And so they know what goals they need to be striving for. So monitoring, controlling progress. This is basically once you've started the project, then what do you do as the teacher? And basically what you need to do is very different than traditional type of teaching, which is you're guiding from the side. So, and you act as a coach, kind of counseling them from the side. And so there are things that you need to provide, such as the various aspects of Native American culture, how to do a display, how to do research. So I'm teaching those skills directly to students, and maybe as whole group, and maybe individuals. But then they're doing most of the work during that. So once I show them how to research, then they do the research, and so on and so forth. If you feel comfortable students already have these skills, you don't need to teach them to them if you feel they already have them. But what you do need to do is provide resources, give them space, and most importantly, is just get out of their way. I find that you micromanage students; they turn out products that you would have created rather than they would have created. So you need to give them some space to be creative. The last part is closing the project, and this is a part that usually gets skipped over a lot of times. And basically, what this is it boils down to how do you know what students truly learn from the projects? And so, because there's two aspects, there's what you want them to learn and what they actually learn. So they may have learned that they're really bad at time management, and that's not necessarily what you wanted them to learn, but it's a valuable lesson, and they can go from there and learn from that mistake. So if you have a final assessment, it might not be enough to determine what students truly got from it. And so I use a lot of reflection. It can be very powerful. So here's an example of a reflection. So once I opened the Native American Museum, students went around and reflected upon their exhibit, other people's exhibits, and this became their assessment. I graded their product, and then this reflection then became the closing aspect to the project. So now you're at the point where you need to plan the project yourself. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you create the basic outline for a project and then go from there. And so you're going to follow these first three steps of the process, which was you're going to define a problem first. You're going to develop a product, what you want students to create, and then you're going to plan the actual project and what that's going to look like and what skills students are going to have to learn. And so you can create three things: the syllabus, using that project contract, a calendar, and a rubric. I have all three of these available for free download on my website. So I'll create a link here that you can use to go and create and have a template, and then you can just fill in the blanks.